Behind the manicured lawns and pristine windows of Oak Ridge Drive, 12-year-old Ethan Parker has watched his stepfather build a kingdom of fear. Greg Marshall, the community's most respected businessman, rules his home with calculated cruelty and his empire with corrupted power. No one asks questions in Oak Ridge, not anymore, not since their kindly neighbor stopped tending his garden. But on a spring afternoon, as Marshall testifies in a hushed courtroom, a door bursts open. A boy stands in the doorway, his hands covered in blood, carrying a truth that will tear down more than just walls, because sometimes justice wears the face of those we least expect. And Ethan Parker is about to show everyone why. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. The sound of raised voices filtered through the thin walls of 12-year-old Ethan Parker's bedroom, pulling him from his restless sleep. He lay still in his bed, eyes fixed on the glow-in-the-dark stars that dotted his ceiling. The ones his mom had helped him put up before everything changed. The muffled argument downstairs was nothing new. It had become as routine as breakfast cereal and homework. "You think I don't see the way you look at him?" Greg's voice carried through the floorboards, barely contained fury evident in every word. "Always chatting over the fence, bringing him cookies? What kind of message does that send? He's just a neighbor, Greg. A kind old man who—" His mother, Lisa's voice trembled slightly, a sound that made Ethan's stomach twist. "Don't interrupt." "Me." The sharp sound of a fist hitting the kitchen counter made both Ethan and his mother flinch. "Your loyalty should be to this family. To me. Do you understand?" Ethan pulled his pillow over his head, trying to block out the sounds. He knew the script by heart. Greg would make threats wrapped in words of concern, his mother would try to placate him, and eventually the house would fall into an uneasy silence. But the fear would linger, hanging in the air like invisible smoke. Morning came too quickly, sunlight streaming through Ethan's window as his alarm buzzed. He dressed quickly, careful to pick clothes that wouldn't draw attention. The house was quiet now, but tension still crackled in the air like static electricity before a storm. In the kitchen, Lisa stood at the stove, her movements careful and measured as she made breakfast. Her honey-blonde hair was pulled back in, a neat ponytail, but Ethan noticed the slight tremor in her hands as she flipped the pancakes. "Morning, sweetie," she said, forcing brightness into her voice. "Did you sleep okay?" "Yeah, Mom." The lie came easily now, practiced over countless mornings. He sat at the table, watching as she placed a plate of pancakes in front of him. A bruise peeked out from under her sleeve as she reached across the table, and Ethan pretended not to notice, just like he pretended not to notice so many things these days. Greg's heavy footsteps on the stairs made them both tense. He entered the kitchen like he owned every molecule of air in it, his 6-foot frame filling the doorway. To outsiders, Gregory Marshall was the picture of success, a respected local businessman with salt and pepper hair and an easy smile. But Ethan knew better. He'd seen the way that smile could twist into something cruel in the space of a heartbeat. "Paper?" Greg demanded, settling into his chair. Lisa quickly brought him the morning newspaper and a cup of coffee, her movements precise, like a dancer avoiding invisible tripwires. "Any plans for today?" "Just work and school," Lisa answered softly. "Ethan has a math test." Greg grunted, already engrossed in the newspaper. Ethan ate his pancakes quietly, trying to make himself as small and unnoticeable as possible. The less attention he drew, the better the morning would go. At school, Ethan found it hard to focus. Mrs. Thompson's voice faded into background noise as he stared out the window, his thoughts drifting back home. Was his mom okay? Would Greg come home early again, looking for things to get angry about? Ethan? Mrs. Thompson's gentle voice broke through his thoughts. The bell rang. "Is everything all right?" He blinked, realizing the classroom was empty except for them. "Sorry, Mrs. Thompson. Just tired." He gathered his books quickly, avoiding her concerned gaze. "You know you can talk to me if something's bothering you," she offered, her kind eyes searching his face. "Everything's fine." Ethan mumbled, hurrying toward the door. Thanks. The walk home took him past Mr. Willis's house, and Ethan slowed his pace. The small blue house with its well-tended garden had always been a source of comfort. Mr. Willis, with his weathered face and quick smile, had been different from the other adults in the neighborhood. He'd never asked questions when Ethan showed up on his porch, just invited him to help fix an old radio or work on his bicycle. Now the house stood empty, its windows dark and accusatory. Yellow police tape still fluttered from the side gate, a reminder that something terrible had happened here. Ethan overheard Mrs. Carson and Mr. Rodriguez talking in hushed voices near the mailboxes. Such a shame about Jack Willis, Mrs. Carson whispered, shaking her head. They're saying it wasn't natural causes at all. I heard there were signs of a struggle, Mr. Rodriguez replied, his voice equally low. Police are looking into it, but you know how these things go sometimes. Their voices trailed off as they noticed Ethan, quickly shifting to discussions about the weather. He hurried past, but their words settled in his stomach like lead weights. At home, Lisa was preparing dinner when Greg returned from work. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, attempting to focus on his homework while keeping one ear tuned to the adults' conversation. There's a field trip next month, Lisa ventured carefully, stirring the pot of spaghetti. To the Science Museum. I thought maybe Ethan could... The sound of Greg's hand slamming on the counter made them both jump. A field trip? You think we're made of money? Besides, he needs to learn responsibility, not waste time looking at dusty exhibits. It's only $20, Lisa said softly. I could use my tip money. The plate in Greg's hand flew across the room, shattering against the wall in a spray of ceramic and half-eaten food. Clean it up, both of you. Now. Ethan and his mother worked in silence, picking up the sharp pieces of Greg's rage. Once Greg had stormed off to his study, Lisa pulled Ethan into a tight hug. I'm sorry, baby, she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. I'm so sorry. Later that night, after Greg had fallen asleep in front of the TV, Ethan crept into his mother's room. She was sitting by the window, staring out at the dark street. Mom, he whispered, why can't we just leave? Just pack up and go somewhere he can't find us. Lisa turned to him, moonlight casting shadows across her face. Oh. Sweetheart, we tried that once, remember? When you were 8? Her voice cracked slightly. He found us at your aunt's house in just 3 days. And after that... She shuddered, wrapping her arms around herself. The memory surfaced like a dark bubble. Frantic packing in the middle of the night. His mother's whispered promises that everything would be okay. The long drive to Aunt Sarah's house. Then Greg showing up, his face a mask of concern for the neighbors, but his eyes burning with fury. The weeks after their return had been some of the worst. A sharp knock at the front door made them both freeze. It was nearly 10 o'clock, too late for casual visitors. They heard Greg's heavy footsteps in the hallway, followed by murmured voices. Then, Greg's voice, unnaturally calm. Of course, officer. I understand completely. When Greg returned upstairs, his face was flushed with anger, a piece of paper crumpled in his fist. Both of you out, he snapped at Lisa and Ethan. Now. They scattered like startled birds, Ethan retreating to his room while Lisa disappeared into the guest bathroom. Through his barely open door, Ethan watched Greg pace the hallway, muttering under his breath as he smoothed out the paper. A subpoena, Ethan realized with a jolt. They won't prove a thing, Greg growled, his voice carrying through the quiet house. Not a damn thing. Over the next few days, Greg's behavior shifted. He spent hours in his backyard shed, emerging with dirt on his clothes and a wild look in his eyes. Late at night, Ethan would hear him on the phone, his voice a harsh whisper. Make sure everything's clean. No, I mean everything. I don't care what it costs. Each night, Ethan lay awake, listening to the sounds of his broken home. His mother's muffled crying, Greg's angry footsteps, the creak of the shed door opening and closing at strange hours. Something had changed after that subpoena arrived. Greg's usual calculated cruelty had taken on an edge of desperation, like a cornered animal. One evening, as Ethan helped his mother with the dishes, he gathered the courage to ask, "Mom, did Mr. Willis ever say anything to you about Greg?" Lisa's hand stilled in the soapy water. "Ethan, please," she whispered, glancing nervously toward Greg's study. Some things are better left alone." But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that Mr. Willis's death, Greg's late-night phone calls, and the mysterious subpoena were all connected by an invisible thread. He just couldn't see the pattern yet. That night, lying in bed, Ethan heard Greg's voice drift up from the backyard. "I told you to handle it. No, you listen to me. If this comes back to us." The rest was lost in the rumble of distant thunder. Ethan pressed his face into his pillow, trying to block out the sound of his stepfather's voice, the memory of Mr. Willis's kind smile, and the growing fear that something terrible was happening right under his nose. The glow-in-the-dark stars above his bed seemed dimmer now, as if they too were afraid to shine too brightly in Greg's domain. In the darkness of his room, Ethan made a silent promise to himself and to Mr. Willis. He would find out what really happened, no matter the cost. But as Greg's angry voice continued to drift up from the yard, Ethan wondered if some promises were too dangerous to keep. The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows like skeleton fingers, and somewhere in the distance, a dog began to howl. It was going to be another long night in the House of Secrets, where even the walls seemed to hold their breath, waiting for the truth to finally break free. The night air carried a bitter chill as Ethan lay in bed, listening to Greg's truck pull out of the driveway for what had become his nightly errand. The sound of gravel crunching under tires faded into silence, leaving the house in an eerie calm. Ethan counted to 300, just to be sure Greg was really gone, before slipping out from under his covers. His mother's soft snoring drifted from down the hall. She'd taken a sleeping pill earlier, something she'd started doing more frequently, since Greg's behavior had become increasingly erratic. The sound reassured Ethan. At least she wouldn't wake and worry about what he was doing. The wooden stairs creaked beneath his feet, despite his careful movements. Each sound seemed magnified in the empty house, but Ethan pressed on, driven by a mixture of fear and determination. The back door's deadbolt slid open with a dull click, and soon he was standing in the backyard, moonlight casting long shadows across the frost-kissed grass. Greg's shed loomed before him, a dark silhouette against the starlit sky. During the day, it looked ordinary enough, just a typical storage space for tools and lawn equipment. But at night, it took on a more sinister appearance, like a creature crouching in the darkness. Ethan's hand trembled as he reached for the padlock, remembering how he'd watched Greg enter the combination just that morning. Right 3 times to 15, left twice to 27, right once to 9. The lock opened with a soft click that seemed to echo in the silent yard. Ethan glanced nervously over his shoulder, half expecting to see Greg's truck returning, but the driveway remained empty. Taking a deep breath, he pulled the shed door, open just enough to slip inside. The smell hit him first, something metallic and sharp that made his nose wrinkle. He fumbled for his phone, using its dim light to navigate the cluttered space. Tools hung from pegboards on the walls, their shadows dancing like threatening figures as his light moved across them. Everything looked normal at first glance, but Ethan knew better. He'd seen Greg hiding something behind the workbench 2 nights ago. Moving deeper into the shed, Ethan's foot caught on something soft. He aimed his phone's light downward, revealing a dark duffel bag partially hidden beneath a tarp. His heart hammered against his ribs as he knelt down, hands shaking as he reached for the zipper. Inside, wrapped in plastic, lay a shirt stained dark with what could only be blood. Beneath it, a crowbar bore the same dark stains, along with a pair of work gloves crusted with rusty brown spots. Ethan's stomach lurched as realization hit him. He was holding evidence of what had happened to Mr. Willis. A car door slammed in the distance, and Ethan nearly dropped the bag in panic. Forcing himself to stay calm, he carefully returned everything, exactly as he'd found it, making sure the tarp lay in the same pattern of folds. His hands were trembling so badly he almost couldn't relock the padlock, but finally, it clicked shut. Back in his room, Ethan lay in bed, his heart still racing. The image of that bloodied shirt burned in his mind, along with the terrible certainty of what it meant. He'd known Greg was capable of cruelty. He'd witnessed it firsthand for years. But murder. The thought made him feel sick. Morning brought no relief from his discovery. At breakfast, Greg sat reading his newspaper as if nothing was wrong, as if he hadn't hidden evidence of a killing in their backyard. Ethan could barely touch his cereal, watching Greg's hands on the coffee mug and thinking about those same hands wielding the crowbar he'd found. "You're quiet this morning," Greg remarked, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied Ethan over the top of his paper. "Just tired," Ethan mumbled, avoiding eye contact. "Didn't sleep well." Greg's grunt carried a note of suspicion that made Ethan's spine tingle with fear. After Greg left for work, Ethan waited until his mother was busy with laundry before sneaking her phone from her purse. His fingers trembled as he searched for local police contacts, quickly writing down the anonymous tip hotline number on a scrap of paper he could hide in his sock drawer. Later that afternoon, when Lisa returned from grocery shopping, Ethan helped her unload the bags while gathering his courage. "Mom," he started, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need to tell you something. About the shed." Lisa's face went pale, and she nearly dropped the can of soup she was holding. "Ethan, no," she hissed, glancing nervously at the windows as if Greg might be watching. "Whatever you think you saw. But Mom, there's evidence in there. About Mr. Willis." Ethan's voice cracked with desperation. "We have to tell someone." "Lower your voice." Lisa grabbed his arm, pulling him close. "You don't understand. Greg has friends everywhere, including Officer Matthews at the police station. Who do you think helped him find us last time we tried to leave?" Ethan felt the hope drain from his chest as his mother continued, her voice trembling. "When I first started dating Greg, before I knew what he was really like, he used to brag about his connections, about how he could make problems disappear. I didn't understand what he meant back then, but now..." She shuddered, wrapping her arms around herself. That evening, as Ethan sat doing homework at the kitchen table, he overheard Greg in his study, his voice tight with barely contained anger. "Did anyone see you near Willis's house?" A pause. "You better be sure about that. We can't afford any loose ends." Ethan's pencil snapped in his grip, and he quickly grabbed another before Greg could notice his reaction. The conversation confirmed what the evidence in the shed had suggested. Greg was behind Mr. Willis's death. But why? What could have made Greg kill the kindly old neighbor? That night, lying in bed, Ethan considered running away. He could pack a bag, take some money from his mother's emergency stash, and be gone before anyone noticed. But the thought of leaving his mother alone with Greg made his stomach twist. No, running away wasn't the answer. It would only make things worse for her. The next morning, Lisa caught Ethan before he left for school, pulling him into a tight hug. "I've been thinking about what you said," she whispered. "About the shed. You're right. We need to do something, but we have to be smart about it. We need more evidence, something concrete that even Greg's friends can't ignore." Hope flickered in Ethan's chest. "You'll help me?" "Yes," Lisa replied, her voice stronger than he'd heard it in years. "But we have to be careful. One wrong move, and..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. That afternoon, Ethan returned from school to find Greg waiting for him in the living room. The man's posture was relaxed, almost casual, but his eyes held a dangerous glint that made Ethan's blood run cold. "Come here, boy," Greg said, patting the couch beside him. When Ethan hesitated, Greg's face hardened. "Now." Ethan forced himself to move, each step feeling like he was walking through deep water. He sat on the edge of the couch, as far from Greg as he dared. "I couldn't help but notice you've been acting different lately," Greg said, his voice deceptively soft, quieter, jumpier, like something's on your mind. He leaned closer, and Ethan could smell the whiskey on his breath. "Want to tell me what that might be?" Ethan shook his head, trying to keep his voice steady. "Nothing's wrong, just school stuff." Greg's hand shot out, gripping Ethan's shoulder hard enough to make him wince. Listen carefully, Greg growled, all pretense of friendliness gone. Stay out of my business, boy. Whatever you think you know, whatever you think you've seen, forget it. Because if you don't... His grip tightened painfully. Well, accidents happen all the time, don't they? Just ask old Jack Willis. The threat hung in the air between them, as tangible as a knife blade. When Greg finally released him, Ethan couldn't get to his room fast enough. He sat on his bed, shaking, the reality of his situation crushing down on him like a physical weight. He had evidence of a murder in his own backyard. His mother was finally willing to help him gather more proof, but Greg knew they were onto him, and he'd made it clear what would happen if they didn't back off. The wrong move could cost them everything. As night fell, Ethan heard his mother crying softly in her room, and Greg's heavy footsteps heading toward the shed once again. The truth about Mr. Willis's death lay just yards from where he slept, but getting to it, and more importantly, getting it to someone who could help, seemed more dangerous with each passing hour. Tomorrow, he and his mother would start their careful investigation, gathering whatever evidence they could find. But tonight, Ethan lay in the darkness, listening to the wind whistling through the trees outside his window, and wondered if they were already in too deep to ever find their way out. Dawn painted the kitchen walls in shades of gray, as Lisa Parker methodically searched through Greg's receipts, her hands trembling slightly as she photographed each one with her phone. Ethan kept watch by the window, scanning for any sign of Greg's truck returning early from his morning workout at the gym. They had established this routine over the past week. These precious morning hours when Greg was predictably absent became their window for gathering evidence. "Mom, look at this one," Ethan whispered, pointing to a receipt she'd just photographed. "Industrial cleaning supplies. Bought the day after..." He couldn't finish the sentence, but Lisa nodded, understanding the implication. The date matched perfectly with Mr. Willis's death. "And here's another," Lisa murmured, pulling out a crumpled paper from the stack. "A receipt for a large freezer, delivered to a storage unit across town." Her voice quavered. "Who needs a freezer and storage?" Ethan felt his stomach twist as possibilities, each more horrifying than the last, flashed through his mind. They carefully replaced the receipts exactly as they'd found them, making sure each paper lined up precisely with the edge of Greg's desk drawer. Even the smallest detail out of place could alert him that someone had been through his things. Later that morning, while Greg was at work, Lisa ventured into his closet under the pretense of doing laundry. In the back, behind Greg's pressed suits and polished shoes, she discovered a box of old photographs. Her sharp intake of breath brought Ethan running. "Look," she whispered, holding up a torn photograph. It showed Lisa and Mr. Willis at last summer's neighborhood barbecue, laughing together over paper plates of potato salad. The edge was ragged where Greg's image had been violently ripped away. He was jealous. All those times he accused me of being too friendly with Jack. I never thought he'd... A car door slammed outside, sending them into a panic. Lisa shoved the box back into place while Ethan ran to check the window. "It's just Mrs. Anderson next door," he reported, his heart still racing, but the close call left them both shaken. That afternoon, Lisa made her way through the neighborhood, carefully asking questions about Mr. Willis's last days. She carried a plate of cookies as cover, playing the role of the concerned neighbor while fishing for information. Most people were happy to talk, unaware of the desperation behind her casual questions. "Jack was acting strange that last week," Mrs. Peterson recalled, accepting a cookie. "Nervous-like. Said he needed to talk to someone about something important, but never told me what it was." Mr. Johnson from across the street remembered seeing Greg's truck parked outside Willis's house late one night, just days before the death. Thought it was odd at the time, he mused. Who makes social calls at midnight? Each piece of information they gathered felt like another drop of water in a bucket that was slowly but surely filling. They just needed enough to convince the authorities, enough to overcome Greg's connections and make someone listen. But Greg wasn't making it easy. He seemed to sense something was different, watching Lisa with increasingly suspicious eyes. When she spent too long on the phone with a neighbor, he appeared suddenly behind her, causing her to jump and drop the receiver. Awful lot of chatting lately, he observed, his voice carrying that dangerous edge that always preceded violence. Almost like you're fishing for something. His hand came down hard on the phone, ending the call. Remember what I said about loyalty, Lisa? That night, after Greg had gone to bed, Lisa broke down in Ethan's room. I don't know how much longer I can do this, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Every time he looks at me, I'm sure he knows. I keep thinking about all the signs I missed, all the warnings I ignored. If I'd been stronger years ago, maybe Jack would still be alive. Ethan held his mother's hand, feeling the slight tremors that never seemed to go away anymore. It's not your fault, Mom. You couldn't have known he'd... He swallowed hard. We're going to fix this. We're going to make him pay for what he did. The next morning brought a new complication. Officer David, Matthews, Greg's friend from the police force, showed up for what he called a routine follow-up on the Willis case. Ethan watched from his bedroom window as Greg met the officer in the driveway. Their body language casual, but their expression serious. Just crossing some T's and dotting some I's, Matthews said loudly enough for the neighbors to hear. But Ethan noticed how quickly the conversation moved inside, away from prying eyes and ears. In Greg's study, the men's voices dropped to harsh whispers. Ethan crept closer to the door, straining to hear. They're asking questions down at the station, Matthews was saying. That nosy detective from the county isn't buying the natural causes angle anymore. Handle it, Greg growled. That's what I pay you for, isn't it? It's not that simple anymore, Greg. There's talk about bringing in state investigators. I can't control that. Find a way. Greg's voice rose dangerously before dropping again. Or should we discuss that little matter from last year? The one that would cost you your badge? The conversation ended shortly after, with Matthews leaving quickly through the back door. Greg emerged from his study looking confident, but Ethan noticed a new tension in his movements, a barely contained fury that threatened to explode at any moment. That evening, Greg's pressure on Lisa reached a breaking point. As she served dinner, he suddenly grabbed her wrist, twisting until she gasped in pain. I know what you've been doing, he snarled. Asking questions, poking around where you don't belong. Did you think I wouldn't find out? Greg, please, Lisa whimpered. You're hurting me. I'm hurting you? He laughed, a sound devoid of humor. You have no idea what hurt is, but keep pushing, and you'll find out. He released her wrist, leaving angry red marks on her skin. Both of you will. The threat hung in the air like poison gas, seeping into every corner of the house. That night, Greg took their phones, claiming they needed to focus on family time. He changed the Wi-Fi password and began checking the landline's call history every evening. Isolation closed in around them like prison walls, but it only strengthened their resolve. Lisa started keeping a detailed diary, recording every threat, every suspicious action. She hid it inside an old photo album, knowing Greg would never look there. He hated family photos, hated any reminder of their life before him. Ethan, meanwhile, found ways to document Greg's behavior at school. He borrowed his friend Mike's phone during lunch to record voice memos about what he'd seen and heard. The evidence accumulated slowly but steadily, each piece another nail in what they hoped would become Greg's coffin. But Greg's paranoia continued to escalate. He installed new locks on the shed and began spending hours inside, the sound of power tools drowning out whatever he was doing. The neighbors reported strange smells coming from that direction, but no one dared to investigate too closely. One particularly tense evening, Greg confronted Ethan directly. The boy had been walking past the shed, trying to peek through the windows, when Greg's hand clamped down on his shoulder from behind. Curious about my workshop, are you? Greg's fingers dug into Ethan's flesh as he spun him around. Want to see what's inside? Ethan's heart hammered in his chest as Greg dragged him toward the shed door. Was this it? Was Greg finally going to show him exactly what had happened to Mr. Willis? But at the last moment, Greg stopped, studying Ethan's face with cold calculation. No, he said finally, shoving Ethan away. I don't think you're ready for what's in there. Just remember, Curiosity killed the cat, and a lot of other things too. That night, Ethan lay awake, his shoulder throbbing where Greg had grabbed him. In the room next door, he could hear his mother crying softly. The sound stirred something in him. Not just fear now, but anger. Hot, righteous anger that burned away some of the paralyzing terror that had ruled their lives for so long. Carefully, silently, Ethan crept to his mother's room. She was sitting by the window again, her face illuminated by moonlight that highlighted the tears on her cheeks. "Mom," he whispered. "We need to step up our plan. We can't wait anymore. He's getting worse." Lisa wiped her eyes, nodding slowly. "I know. I've been thinking, I have an old phone hidden in my work locker. Tomorrow, I'll bring it home. We can use it to record him. Get solid proof of his threats, his confession about Jack." "It's dangerous," Ethan warned. "Everything about this is dangerous," Lisa replied, a new strength in her voice. "But we're already in danger. At least this way, we're fighting back." The next day, Lisa brought home the phone as planned. It was an old model, but it worked. They hid it in a hollow book in the living room, positioned to capture Greg's violent outbursts and incriminating conversations. That evening, as if fate was working in their favor, Greg launched into one of his rages. Lisa had asked about taking Ethan to a doctor for his increasingly frequent headaches. Headaches they both knew came from stress and fear. "No doctors," Greg roared, sending a chair crashing to the floor. "No one outside this family needs to know our business. You understand me? Or do I need to remind you what happens to people who don't keep their mouths shut?" The hidden phone captured every word, every threat, every implicit admission of violence. When Greg finally stormed out to the shed, Lisa and Ethan traded glances heavy with meaning. They had him on record threatening them, hinting at Mr. Willis's murder. It wasn't enough to prove he'd killed Jack Willis, but it was a start. It showed his true nature, his capacity for violence, his willingness to harm others to keep his secrets. Combined with the physical evidence they'd documented and the witness statements Lisa had gathered, it was beginning to form a picture that even Greg's police friends couldn't easily dismiss. But as they lay in their beds that night, listening to Greg moving around in the shed again, they knew they were walking an increasingly dangerous line. One wrong move, one slip-up, and they could end up like Mr. Willis. Just another tragic story for the neighbors to whisper about. The hidden phone continued recording, capturing the sound of Greg's truck pulling out of the driveway for another late-night errand. In the darkness, mother and son lay awake in their separate rooms, each praying that their evidence would be enough, that help would come before Greg's rage finally boiled over and destroyed them all. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, and hopefully new evidence. But for now, they could only wait, their hearts beating in time with the ticking of the clock, counting down the hours until dawn would bring another chance to fight back against the monster who ruled their lives. The weight of Greg's revolver pressed against his hip as he paced the living room, a new addition to his daily routine that made Lisa's blood run cold every time she caught a glimpse of metal beneath his jacket. He'd started carrying it everywhere, muttering about being prepared and handling problems. The weapon was just another sign of his growing paranoia, another reminder of how dangerous their situation had become. Going to the hardware store, Greg announced, his eyes scanning the room as if memorizing every detail. "Don't leave the house while I'm gone, either of you." The threat in his voice was clear as he adjusted his jacket, making sure they both saw the gun. The moment Greg's truck disappeared down the street, Lisa sprang into action. "Now's our chance," she whispered to Ethan, pulling out the envelope of evidence they'd collected. Photos of the receipts, Lisa's diary entries, the recordings from the hidden phone, everything that proved Greg's guilt. But he said not to leave. Ethan protested weakly, though he was already helping his mother gather their documentation. "If we don't do this now, we might not get another chance." Lisa's hands trembled as she stuffed the envelope into her purse. "I'll drive to the police station while he's out. Detective Reynolds said she'd be there today. She's not one of Greg's friends. She'll listen." They moved quickly, years of walking on eggshells making them naturally quiet despite their haste. Lisa had just reached for her car keys when they heard it, the distinctive rumble of Greg's truck turning back onto their street. "He's coming back." Ethan's whispered warning sent them into a panic. Lisa shoved the envelope under a couch cushion just as Greg's key turned in the lock. He filled the doorway, his face dark with rage. "Going somewhere?" The question came out as a growl. "After I specifically told you to stay put?" "I was just getting something from the car," Lisa stammered, but Greg was already advancing on her, his hand moving toward his hip. "Liar." He spat the word like poison. "You think I don't know what you've been doing? The calls to the police? The evidence you've been collecting?" He pulled out his gun, letting it hang at his side, a reminder of his power over them. "Officer Matthews told me everything. About your little talks with Detective Reynolds. About the investigation you're trying to start." Lisa backed away, pushing Ethan behind her. "Greg, please. Think about what you're doing." "Oh, I have thought about it. For weeks now, I've thought about nothing else." His laugh was hollow, desperate. "Ever since that old man stuck his nose where it didn't belong, everything's been falling apart. But I can fix this, just like I fixed him." "You killed Mr. Willis," Ethan said, his voice stronger than he felt. "Because he knew something about you, didn't he? Something in your business records?" Greg's head snapped toward Ethan, his eyes wild. "Shut up. You don't know anything about it." But his reaction confirmed what they'd suspected all along. Willis was going to ruin everything. Years of work, all my connections, everything I built. He was going to destroy it all with his self-righteous concerns about where the money came from. "So you killed him," Lisa whispered, horror and anger mixing in her voice. "Our kind neighbor, who helped everyone, who never harmed anyone. You murdered him in cold blood." "I protected what's mine," Greg roared, raising the gun. "And now I'm going to protect it again. Both of you into the basement, now." "No." Lisa's refusal came out barely above a whisper, but it filled the room like a thunderclap. "No more, Greg. We're leaving." The gun shook in Greg's hand. "You're not going anywhere, ever again." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Lisa lunged for her purse, probably thinking of the phone inside, of calling for help. Greg's face contorted with rage as he stepped forward, grabbing her arm and yanking her away from the purse. The gun waved wildly between them as they struggled. Ethan watched in horror as his mother fought against Greg's grip. Without thinking, he ran to the kitchen, grabbing the first weapon he could find, a large knife from the cutting block. "Let her go!" he screamed, holding the knife out in front of him with trembling hands. Greg spun around, dragging Lisa with him. "Look at you trying to be a hero," he sneered. "Put it down before you hurt yourself, boy." "I said, let her go." Ethan took a step forward, the knife steady now despite his fear. What happened next was a blur of motion and sound. Greg shoved Lisa aside, lunging for Ethan. They collided in a tangle of limbs and weaponry. The knife sliced through the air and through flesh. Blood appeared on Ethan's hands as he struggled with Greg, neither of them sure in the chaos whose blood it was. Lisa screamed, scrambling for the house phone. Greg released Ethan, turning toward her with murderous intent, but she had already dialed 911. "Help!" she screamed into the receiver. "He has a gun. Please, he's going to—" Greg's hand came down hard, smashing the phone against the wall. But it was too late. The call had gone through. They could hear the 911 operator's tinny voice coming from the broken handset. "Units are being dispatched to your location." "You stupid bitch," Greg snarled, raising his hand to strike Lisa. But before he could, Ethan tackled him from behind. They went down hard, the gun skittering across the floor and under the couch. Greg's elbow caught Ethan in the ribs, driving the air from his lungs. The man was stronger, his rage making him even more dangerous. But Ethan held on desperately. They rolled across the floor, knocking over a lamp, sending pictures crashing from the walls. Lisa ran for the gun, dropping to her knees to reach under the couch. Greg saw her movement and released Ethan, scrambling toward her. But before he could reach her, sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer by the second. Greg froze, his face a mask of fury and fear. For a moment, they all remained still, the only sound their heavy breathing and the approaching sirens. Then Greg turned and ran, heading for the back door. No! Lisa had retrieved the gun, but her hand shook as she pointed it at Greg's retreating form. Stop! But Greg was already through the door, sprinting across the backyard toward the woods behind their property. Lisa dropped the gun, running to Ethan, who still lay on the floor, blood staining his hands and shirt. "Baby, are you hurt? Where's the blood coming from?" Her hands moved over him frantically, checking for wounds. "I'm okay," Ethan gasped, though every breath sent pain shooting through his ribs where Greg had struck him. "Most of it's not mine. I think I cut him when we fought." Police cars screeched to a halt outside their house, lights painting the walls in alternating red and blue. Officers burst through the front door, weapons drawn, responding to the 911 call about an armed suspect. "He went that way," Lisa pointed, toward the back door. "Through the woods. He killed our neighbor, Mr. Willis. We have proof." While some officers pursued Greg, others secured the scene. Detective Reynolds, the one Lisa had been trying to contact, arrived shortly after, her face grim as she took in the chaos of the living room. "Mrs. Marshall," she began, but Lisa cut her off. "Parker," she said firmly. "I'm going back to Parker. I should never have taken his name." The detective nodded, her expression softening. "Mrs. Parker, we need to get you both checked out by paramedics. And then I need to know everything. Starting with Mr. Willis." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Paramedics cleaned and bandaged the shallow cuts on Ethan's hands, while police photographed the scene and collected evidence. Lisa retrieved their carefully gathered documentation from under the couch cushion, handing everything over to Detective Reynolds. "This is, extensive," the detective said, paging through their evidence. "You've been documenting his behavior for weeks?" "Months," Lisa corrected. "Ever since Mr. Willis died. We knew Greg did it, but he had friends in the department. We needed enough proof that no one could ignore it." More officers arrived, bringing dogs to track Greg through the woods. The K9 units picked up his trail quickly. He was bleeding from where Ethan had cut him, making him easier to track. But as darkness fell, they still hadn't found him. "We've got roadblocks set up," Detective Reynolds assured them. "And we're monitoring his bank accounts and credit cards. He won't get far." But they all knew Greg was clever. He had connections, places he could hide. The thought of him out there, free and angry, made Ethan shudder. "You'll both need to be in protective custody," the detective continued. "At least until we apprehend him. We have a safe house ready." Lisa nodded numbly, holding Ethan close. They watched as crime scene technicians examined the knife, the gun, the broken phone, all evidence now in what had become both a domestic violence case and a murder investigation. "The blood on your hands," Detective Reynolds said to Ethan, her voice gentle but professional. "We'll need samples to compare with what we found in Mr. Willis's house, and the knife." "Will help prove he killed Mr. Willis?" Ethan asked hopefully. "It might. Along with everything else you've collected, it builds a strong case. But first, we need to find him." They spent that night in a hotel under police protection, mother and son holding each other as they tried to sleep. Every sound made them jump. A door closing down the hall, voices in the parking lot, the ice machine humming to life. Even with officers posted outside their door, they couldn't shake the fear that Greg would find them. "I'm proud of you," Lisa whispered in the darkness. "You were so brave today. But I'm sorry you had to be. I'm sorry for all of it." Ethan squeezed his mother's hand. "We're free now. That's what matters." But they weren't free, not really. Not while Greg was still out there. Every shadow held potential threat. Every stranger's face could be him in disguise. The police presence outside their door was both reassuring and a reminder of their ongoing danger. 3 days passed in the hotel, each hour bringing updates from the investigation. The forensics team had found more evidence in the shed. Traces of blood that matched Mr. Willis, tools that could have caused his injuries, Greg's financial records revealed suspicious transactions, suggesting the money laundering operation that Mr. Willis had discovered. On the fourth day, Detective Reynolds arrived with news that made Lisa sink into a chair in relief. "We got him. State police picked him up trying to cross the border into Canada. He's being transported back now." But even as she spoke, Ethan could see worry in her eyes. "What is it?" he asked. "What aren't you telling us?" The detective hesitated before answering. "He's still claiming innocence, says you attacked him unprovoked, that all the evidence was planted, and some of his friends in the department are backing his story." "But what about everything we found? The recordings? The blood evidence?" Lisa's voice rose in panic. "It's complicated," Detective Reynolds admitted. "The case is strong, but with his connections, we need something definitive. Something that will convince a jury beyond any doubt." Ethan looked down at his hands, remembering the blood that had covered them during the fight. In that moment, he made a decision. "I want to testify," he said firmly. "I want to tell everyone exactly what he did." The detective and Lisa shared a concerned look. "Honey, are you sure?" Lisa asked. "You'd have to face him in court. Tell your story in front of everyone." "I'm sure," Ethan replied, his voice stronger than he'd ever heard it. "I'm not afraid anymore. He needs to pay for what he did to Mr. Willis, to you, to all of us." As they began preparing for the trial, Ethan thought about all the evidence they'd gathered, all the pieces that would come together to tell the true story of Gregory Marshall. But most of all, he thought about Mr. Willis, the kind neighbor, who had tried to stop Greg's crimes and paid with his life. "We'll make it right," Ethan whispered that night, looking out the hotel window at the stars. "I promise, Mr. Willis. We'll make him pay for everything he did." The trial would begin soon, and Ethan knew it would be the hardest thing he'd ever done. But as he looked at his mother, finally sleeping peacefully for the first time in years, he knew it would be worth it. They had survived Greg's reign of terror. Now it was time to make sure he could never hurt anyone ever again. The courthouse loomed before them, its stone facade casting long shadows in the early morning light. Lisa squeezed Ethan's hand as they climbed the steps, both of them flanked by police officers. Today marked the beginning of Greg's trial, and the air felt heavy with anticipation. "Remember," Detective Reynolds said quietly as they approached, "the security checkpoint. You don't have to look at him. Just focus on telling your story." She'd been there rock through the preparations, helping them understand what to expect in the courtroom. The courtroom itself was smaller than Ethan had imagined, but somehow more intimidating. Dark wood panels lined the walls, and the judge's bench seemed to tower over everything. As they took their seats behind the prosecution table, Ethan could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on them. When they brought Greg in, Ethan felt his mother stiffen beside him. His stepfather wore a well-tailored suit that couldn't quite hide the handcuffs binding his wrists. Greg's eyes swept the courtroom, landing on them with a look that made Ethan's blood run cold. Despite everything, Greg still had the power to terrify them with just a glance. The trial began with opening statements. The prosecutor, Sarah Nichols, stood before the jury, her voice clear and confident. "This case is about power and control," she began. "About a man who would do anything, including murder, to maintain his grip on both. We will prove that Gregory Marshall not only abused his wife and stepson, but also killed Jack Willis to protect his criminal enterprise." Greg's defense attorney, James Sullivan, painted a different picture. "My client is the victim of a vindictive wife and a troubled child," he argued smoothly. "The so-called evidence against him was planted, the accusations manufactured. Greg Marshall is a respected businessman being framed by his own family." As witness after witness took the stand, Ethan watched the story of their lives unfold through others' eyes. Mrs. Peterson testified about hearing arguments from their house, about seeing Lisa's bruises poorly hidden under long sleeves. Mr. Johnson described the night he'd seen Greg's truck outside Willis's house. Even Officer Matthews appeared, looking uncomfortable as he admitted under oath that he'd helped Greg handle certain problems in the past. During a break in proceedings, Lisa received a call from Detective Reynolds. She stepped into the hallway, to take it, leaving Ethan with their victim advocate, Sarah. Through the courtroom's open door, he could hear his mother's voice rising in distress. "What do you mean you found more blood? Where?" Lisa's questions echoed off the marble walls. "In Willis's shed? But that's been searched before." Ethan's heart began to race. He slipped away from Sarah, moving closer to the door to hear better. "And, you're sure it's recent?" Lisa was saying. "Someone's been there, but who would—" Oh God. "You think he had help? Someone working for him even now?" A commotion at the other end of the hallway drew Ethan's attention. A man he recognized as one of Greg's business associates was arguing with a security guard, demanding to be let into the restricted area. Something about the man's aggressive stance, the way his hand kept moving to his jacket pocket, set off alarm bells in Ethan's mind. He turned to warn his mother, but Lisa was already heading back toward their house, phone pressed to her ear as she continued talking to Detective Reynolds. "I'll check the shed right now," she was saying. "If there's new evidence—" "Mom, wait!" Ethan called out, but she was too focused on her conversation to hear him. He looked back at the suspicious man, who had now slipped past the distracted guard and was following Lisa toward the exit. Without thinking, Ethan ran after them. He burst through the heavy courthouse doors just in time to see his mother getting into her car, the mysterious man not far behind. Neither of them noticed him as he sprinted down the steps and jumped into the back seat just before Lisa pulled away from the curb. "Mom, someone's following us," he blurted out once they were moving. Lisa's eyes flew to the rearview mirror. "Ethan, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be in court." "There's a man, one of Greg's friends. He was watching you and followed when you left." Sure enough, a dark sedan pulled out behind them, keeping pace as they wound through the city streets. Lisa's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Call Detective Reynolds," she ordered, her voice tense. But when Ethan reached for his phone, he realized he'd left it back in the courtroom in his hurry to follow his mother. Lisa's phone lay dead on the passenger seat, its battery drained from the long call. They pulled into their driveway, the dark sedan parking a few houses down. "Stay in the car," Lisa commanded as she got out. "Lock the doors." Instead, Ethan scrambled after her. "Mom, please, it's not safe." They reached their front door just as the man from the courthouse stepped onto their property. "Mrs. Marshall," he called out, his voice falsely pleasant. "Or is it Parker now? We need to talk." Lisa pushed Ethan behind her as she faced the man. "Stay back. The police are on their way." It was a bluff, but her voice didn't waver. The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "No, they're not. Just like they're not guarding Willis's old shed anymore. Convenient, isn't it? How evidence can appear and disappear when the right people are." Distracted, he reached into his jacket, and Ethan's world narrowed to the glint of metal as a gun emerged. "Now, about that new evidence you're so eager to find." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. The man advanced, weapon raised. Lisa shoved Ethan toward the door, fumbling with her keys. But before they could get inside, the man grabbed Lisa's arm, yanking her away from the door. "Greg wants to make sure you understand what happens to people who don't keep their mouths shut," he growled, pressing the gun to Lisa's side. Ethan looked around frantically for a weapon, anything he could use to help his mother. His eyes landed on their garden tools, propped against the house. Without thinking, he grabbed a rusty trowel and swung it at the man's arm. The impact wasn't strong enough to do serious damage, but it surprised the man, making him loosen his grip on Lisa. She took advantage of the distraction to drive her elbow back into his stomach. As they struggled, the gun went off with a deafening crack. Time seemed to stop. Ethan watched in horror as blood bloomed on the man's shirt, but not from a gunshot. The rusty trowel had caught him across the chest, leaving a long, jagged cut. The man staggered backward, dropping the gun, his hand pressed to the bleeding wound. Lisa snatched up the weapon and pointed it at their attacker. "Get off my property," she commanded, her voice steel. "Now!" The man backed away, his face twisted with rage and pain. "This isn't over," he spat before turning and running to his car. As soon as he was gone, Lisa dropped the gun and grabbed Ethan, checking him for injuries. "Are you hurt? Did he?" But Ethan wasn't listening. His mind was racing, pieces falling into place. "Mom, don't you see? The blood in Willis's shed. It wasn't old evidence. Greg's people are planting new evidence to confuse the investigation." Lisa's eyes widened with understanding. "They're trying to create reasonable doubt, make it look like someone else could have killed Jack. We have to tell Detective Reynolds." Ethan looked down at his hands, covered in their attacker's blood, from the rusty trowel. An idea struck him. "Mom, how far is the courthouse from Willis's house?" "About 10 minutes. Why?" "Because that's where they'll plant the evidence next. We need proof that Greg's working with people on the outside. If we can catch them in the act." Lisa was already moving toward the car. "I'll drive to Willis's place. Call for backup." "No," Ethan said firmly. "Take me to the courthouse. The trial's still in session. Everyone needs to know what Greg's doing. If we wait for the police to investigate, his people will have time to clean up any evidence." His mother hesitated, clearly torn between protecting her son and seizing their chance to expose Greg's ongoing manipulation. "Ethan, it's too dangerous. Everything about this is dangerous," he countered, echoing her own words from weeks ago. "But we have to end this, today." The drive back to the courthouse passed in a blur of tension and determination. Ethan's hands still bore the evidence of their encounter, the blood from the man who had threatened them, proof that Greg was still orchestrating violence from behind bars. They parked haphazardly outside the courthouse, ignoring the security. Guards' shouts as they raced up the steps. Ethan's heart pounded in his ears as they approached the courtroom doors. Inside, he could hear Greg's smooth voice testifying, spinning lies about his innocence. "Wait here," he told his mother, his voice surprisingly steady. "When I go in, call Detective Reynolds. Tell her everything." Before Lisa could protest, Ethan pushed open the heavy doors. The courtroom fell silent as he burst in, his blood-stained hands raised to show everyone the evidence of Greg's latest attempt to silence them. "He's lying!" Ethan shouted, his voice ringing through the stunned silence. "He sent someone to attack us. He's still trying to cover up what he did to Mr. Willis." Greg's composed facade cracked, just for a moment. But it was enough. In that split second, everyone in the courtroom saw the truth behind his carefully constructed mask. The rage, the violence, the desperation of a man who would do anything to maintain control. The judge called for order as chaos erupted in the courtroom, but Ethan stood his ground, his bloody hands testament to the ongoing battle between truth and lies, between justice and manipulation. In that moment, as his stepfather's true nature was finally exposed for all to see, Ethan felt the last traces of fear melt away. They had won. Not just for themselves, but for Mr. Willis, and for every other victim of Greg's violence and corruption. The truth, like the blood on Ethan's hands, could no longer be hidden or denied. The courtroom froze in a tableau of shock following Ethan's dramatic entrance. Judge Eleanor Franklin's gavel cracked through the stunned silence, but even its sharp report couldn't break the electric tension that filled the air. Greg sat rigid in the witness stand, his mask of civility cracking as his eyes fixed on Ethan's blood-stained hands. "Order. I will have order in this court." Judge Franklin's voice cut through the growing murmurs. "Young man, approach the bench immediately." Lisa burst through the doors behind Ethan, Detective Reynolds at her side. The detective's face was grim as she strode forward, placing a protective hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Your Honor, we have an emergency situation. There's been an attack at the Parker residence, and we have reason to believe it's connected to evidence, tampering in this case." Greg's attorney, James Sullivan, leapt to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. This is clearly a staged disruption meant to prejudice the jury." "The blood on my hands is from one of his men." Ethan's voice rang out clear and strong. "He attacked my mom at our house. Greg's trying to plant false evidence in Mr. Willis's shed." The judge's stern expression deepened as she surveyed the scene before her. "Counsel, approach the bench. Now." Her voice left no room for argument. As the attorneys huddled around her bench, she turned to Detective Reynolds. Detective, please escort the boy to my chambers. I want a full report of what's happened. In the judge's chambers, Ethan's hands trembled as a crime scene technician swabbed them for DNA evidence. He recounted everything: the mysterious man at the courthouse, the chase, the attack at their house, and their realization about the evidence tampering. "And you're certain you heard them discussing planting evidence?" Judge Franklin asked, her keen eyes studying Ethan's face. "Yes, Your Honor. The man said something about evidence appearing and disappearing when the right people are distracted." Ethan met her gaze steadily. "Greg's been controlling everything from jail, using his connections to try to confuse the investigation." The judge turned to Detective Reynolds. "Have you confirmed any of this?" "We've already dispatched units to both the Parker residence and Willis's property," Reynolds replied. "And we've identified the man from the courthouse security footage, Robert Kane, a former employee of Marshall's business, who's been visiting him in jail regularly." Back in the courtroom, the jury had been temporarily dismissed while the judge heard arguments about how to proceed. Greg sat with his attorneys, his composure noticeably shaken. The confident smile he'd worn earlier had vanished, replaced by a tightly controlled mask of tension. Sarah Nichols, the prosecutor, stood before the judge. "Your Honor, in light of these developments, the state moves to present new evidence of witness tampering and obstruction of justice. Mr. Marshall's apparent coordination of attacks and evidence manipulation from inside jail speaks directly to his consciousness of guilt." Sullivan fought back hard. "This is all speculation and theatrics, Your Honor. A scared boy's imagination and a mother's manipulation. Where's the proof that my client had anything to do with whatever happened at their house?" The answer came in the form of Detective Reynolds returning to the courtroom with a tablet in hand. "Your Honor, we've just received the security footage from the jail's visiting area. The conversation between Marshall and Caney was recorded yesterday. The footage played on the courtroom's monitors. Though the audio was muffled, Greg's intent was clear as he leaned close to Caney, pointing at what appeared to be a map of the neighborhood. Their lips were easy to read as they discussed Willis's shed and creating confusion. Greg's face darkened as he watched his own machinations played back for the court. His hands clenched into fists, knuckles white with suppressed rage. But it was his eyes that betrayed him most. They darted between the exits like a trapped animal's, calculating escape routes even now. "Furthermore," Detective Reynolds continued, "we've just arrested Robert Kane attempting to flee the state. He's already offering to cooperate in exchange for leniency, including details about Mr. Marshall's involvement in Jack Willis's murder." The judge's decision was swift and decisive. "The jury will be allowed to hear this new evidence. Mr. Marshall's bail is hereby revoked, and he will be remanded to custody under maximum security with no visitors pending additional charges of witness tampering and conspiracy." As court officers moved to take Greg into custody, he exploded from his chair. "This is all lies," he roared, his careful facade finally shattering completely. "That brat and his whore mother set me up. I should have dealt with them like I dealt with Willis." The courtroom erupted in chaos. Greg's outburst, his implicit confession, hung in the air like a thunderclap. Court officers tackled him as he tried to lunge toward Lisa and Ethan, his face contorted with murderous rage. "Get him out of here," Judge Franklin ordered, her voice cutting through the tumult. "And someone get these people some protection. Real protection this time, not officers on Marshall's payroll." As Greg was dragged from the courtroom, still shouting threats, Ethan felt the weight of the past months lifting from his shoulders. His mother pulled him close, her arms trembling, but strong around him. They had done it. They had finally broken through Greg's carefully constructed walls of lies and manipulation. The next days passed in a blur of activity. Caney's cooperation opened a floodgate of evidence. He detailed how Greg had discovered Willis investigating financial irregularities in the business, leading to a confrontation that ended in murder. He revealed the network of corrupt officers and officials Greg had bought over the years, each name another nail in the coffin of Greg's defense. The forensics team found tools in Willis's shed that had been planted recently, along with blood evidence that had been deliberately contaminated. Each discovery reinforced the extent of Greg's attempts to manipulate the investigation, even from behind bars. Officer Matthews and several other corrupt police officers were arrested, their involvement in covering up Greg's crimes exposed by Caney's testimony. The investigation expanded beyond Willis's murder, unveiling years of money laundering and corruption that had funded Greg's apparent success. When the jury returned to hear the new evidence, their faces showed a mix of shock and determination. The case that had seemed circumstantial was now concrete, backed by confessions and physical evidence that couldn't be explained away by Greg's expensive lawyers. Sarah Nichols presented the expanded case methodically, building an irrefutable picture of Greg's crimes, the money laundering that Willis had discovered, the murder that silenced him, the years of domestic abuse, the elaborate conspiracy to avoid justice. With each piece of evidence, Greg's chances of acquittal crumbled. Further, Sullivan tried to maintain his client's defense, but his arguments rang hollow in the face of overwhelming evidence. Even he seemed to struggle to defend Greg's actions as the full scope of his crimes became clear. 1 week after Ethan's dramatic entrance, the jury began their deliberations. They returned in less than 2 hours. Record time for a case of this complexity. The forewoman stood, her voice clear and unwavering as she read the verdict. On the count of first-degree murder in the death of Jack Willis, we find the defendant guilty. Lisa squeezed Ethan's hand as the verdicts continued. On the count of conspiracy to obstruct justice, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of witness tampering, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of money laundering, we find the defendant guilty. Each guilty verdict felt like another brick being lifted from their shoulders, another chain breaking free. Greg stood motionless as his fate was sealed, his face a mask of cold fury. During sentencing, Judge Franklin spoke directly to Greg. "Mr. Marshall, your crimes show a pattern of calculated cruelty and corruption that this court finds particularly abhorrent. You murdered a man who dared to stand up to your criminal enterprise. You terrorized your family and manipulated the justice system. Even from jail, you continued to orchestrate violence and deception." She paused, her gaze stern and unwavering. "I sentence you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for the murder of Jack Willis, with additional consecutive sentences for your other crimes. You will never again be free to harm another person." As Greg was led away for the last time, Ethan watched him go with a mixture of relief and sadness. Not for Greg, but for all the years of fear and pain he had inflicted on them. His mother's arm around his shoulders anchored him, reminding him that they were finally truly free. Detective Reynolds approached them as the courtroom began to clear. "You both showed incredible courage," she said softly. "Jack Willis would be proud of how you fought for justice." Lisa wiped tears from her eyes. "What happens now, with all the corrupt officers and officials?" "The investigation is ongoing," Reynolds replied. "Greg's network ran deep, but we're rooting it out. Your testimony and evidence broke the case wide open. A lot of people who thought they were untouchable are about to face justice." Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered to hear the verdict. Lisa and Ethan slipped out a side door, not ready to face the media circus that would surely follow such a sensational case. The late afternoon sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, a beautiful ending to a day that had changed their lives forever. They drove home in comfortable silence, both lost in thoughts of the future. A future without fear, without looking over their shoulders, without walking on eggshells in their own home. The house, when they pulled into the driveway, looked different somehow. Lighter, as if Greg's darkness had lifted from it, leaving only possibility behind. "Mom," Ethan said as they walked to the front door, "can we plant something in the garden? For Mr. Willis?" Lisa smiled, tears shining in her eyes. "I think that's a wonderful idea, sweetheart." He always did love helping things grow. They stood together in their yard, planning where to plant flowers and vegetables, reclaiming the space that had been dominated by Greg's shed and his secrets. The future stretched before them, not perfect, but free from the shadow that had darkened their lives for so long. As the sun set on the day that had seen justice finally served, Ethan thought about the blood that had stained his hands. Not just today, but all the times he'd helped his mother clean up after Greg's rages. Those stains were finally washed away, replaced by the promise of healing and new beginnings. The truth had set them free, just as Mr. Willis had believed it would. His courage in standing up to Greg had cost him his life, but his death had not been in vain. Because of him, because of their fight for justice, Greg's reign of terror was finally, irrevocably, over. The safe house sat at the end of a quiet suburban street, its unremarkable facade masking the heightened security measures, protecting those inside. Lisa and Ethan Parker had been there for 3 days, ever since Detective Reynolds discovered credible threats against them from members of Greg's criminal network who remained at large. "How much longer do we need to stay here?" Ethan asked, watching rain streak down the bulletproof windows. The house was comfortable enough, but it felt like another kind of prison, albeit one meant to protect rather than confine. "Just until we're sure it's safe," Lisa replied, though uncertainty tinged her voice. She was sitting at the kitchen table, reviewing financial documents with Detective Reynolds. The papers spread before them told a story of money and corruption that grew more complex with each passing hour. "Look at this transaction," Reynolds said, pointing to a highlighted line. $300,000 moved through 7 different shell companies before ending up in an offshore account. Greg wasn't just laundering money, he was building an empire. Lisa's hands trembled as she examined the document. All those business trips, the late-night phone calls. I knew something wasn't right, but I never imagined the scale of it. A knock at the door made them all tense, but it was just the shift change for their protective detail. Officer Sarah Chen entered, her face grave. "We've got another one," she announced, handing Reynolds a file. "Former associate of Greg's just confessed. Says he knows what really happened the night Willis died." The confession came from Marcus Weber, a former accountant at Greg's company who'd been arrested on related charges. His statement painted a chilling picture of the events leading to Willis's murder. Jack wasn't just suspicious of the money laundering, Reynolds explained as she read through Weber's account. He had proof, actual documentation of every illegal transaction Greg had made over the past 5 years. According to Weber, Willis had discovered discrepancies in the company's books while helping a neighbor with their taxes. Being a former accountant himself, he recognized the signs of money laundering immediately. Instead of confronting Greg directly, he had meticulously gathered evidence, building a case to take to the authorities. "That's what I overheard," Ethan suddenly remembered, the memory surfacing like a bubble breaking the water's surface. "That argument between Greg and Mr. Willis months ago. I was fixing my bike in the driveway when Mr. Willis came over." Reynolds leaned forward, her notebook ready. "What exactly did you hear?" Mr. Willis told Greg he knew what was happening with the creative accounting. He said something about having copies of everything in a safe place. Ethan closed his eyes, concentrating. Greg laughed it off, but I remember how his hands were shaking when he went back inside. Lisa gasped softly. "The week before he died, Jack tried to give me something. An envelope. He said to keep it somewhere safe, that it was insurance. But Greg came home early and interrupted us. Jack never got another chance to give it to me." Reynolds was already on her phone, coordinating with the forensics team still processing. "Willis's house. We need to find that envelope. If Willis documented everything." The search of Willis's house took on new urgency. Teams combed through every inch of the property, looking for anywhere Willis might have hidden crucial evidence. But it was Ethan who made the breakthrough, remembering something else from that long-ago afternoon. "Mr. Willis was always writing. In this journal," he said. "He kept it in his workshop. The day of the argument, I saw him adding something to it right after Greg left." The journal, when found, proved to be more than just a diary. Hidden between its pages was a key to a safety deposit box at the local bank. Inside that box, investigators found what Jack Willis had died protecting: detailed records of Greg's entire criminal operation. "It's all here," Reynolds breathed as she examined the documents. Account numbers, transaction records, names of co-conspirators. Willis didn't just find proof of money laundering. He uncovered a network of corruption that spreads through half the state. The evidence painted a damning picture. Greg hadn't been working alone. He'd built a sophisticated criminal enterprise that involved corrupt politicians, dirty cops, and legitimate businesses used as fronts for illegal activities. The money laundering was just the tip of the iceberg. In his detailed notes, Willis had documented how Greg used his business connections to facilitate drug trafficking, bribe public officials, and systematically destroy anyone who threatened to expose him. The peaceful suburban life he'd constructed was nothing but a facade, hiding a darkness deeper than anyone had imagined. When confronted with the new evidence in prison, Greg remained arrogantly defiant. "You'll never prove it," he sneered at Detective Reynolds. "You think finding some old man's paperwork changes anything? I still have friends in high places." But Greg had miscalculated. The evidence Willis had gathered was comprehensive enough to shake even his most loyal allies. One by one, faced with the prospect of long prison sentences, Greg's associates began to turn on him. Robert Caney, the man who had attacked Lisa and Ethan, was the first to fully cooperate. His testimony opened floodgates of information about Greg's operation. Marshall was paranoid, Caney revealed during questioning. He kept records of everything. Insurance, he called it. Dirt on anyone who might turn against him. The investigation expanded rapidly. Search warrants were executed across 3 states. Police officers, judges, and business leaders found themselves under scrutiny, as Willis's evidence led investigators through the tangled web of Greg's connections. Lisa and Ethan watched the news reports from their safe house as more arrests were made each day. Names they recognized, people who had been regular guests at their dinner table, were led away in handcuffs, their carefully constructed respectability crumbling under the weight of evidence. "I can't believe how many people were involved," Lisa whispered one evening, after watching another news report about the investigation. "All this time we were surrounded by bad people helping other bad people," Ethan finished. He thought about all the times these same individuals had smiled at him, patted his head, complimented his mother's cooking, all while knowing about and profiting from Greg's crimes. The most shocking revelation came when investigators found a hidden ledger in Willis's home, concealed behind a loose brick in his workshop fireplace. The ledger contained not just financial records, but detailed notes about conversations Willis had overheard, meetings he had witnessed, and patterns he had observed over years of quiet watching. Jack Willis wasn't just some nosy neighbor. Reynolds explained to Lisa and Ethan. Before retiring, he worked for the IRS's Criminal Investigation Division. He knew exactly what he was looking at when he spotted the irregularities in Greg's business. Willis had been building his case methodically, using his experience and training to document everything in a way that would stand up in court. His notes revealed that he had recognized Greg's true nature early on, watching with growing concern as the signs of domestic abuse became clearer. "There's an entry here from last summer," Reynolds said, reading from the ledger. "Watched G grab E. L's arm hard enough to leave marks. She's wearing long sleeves in August now. E flinches when G raises his voice. Someone needs to help them, but going to the police isn't an option. Too many of G's friends on the force. Need concrete evidence first." Tears rolled down Lisa's cheeks as she listened to Willis's words. He was trying to help us all along, and Greg killed him for it. The ledger also contained evidence of Willis attempting to build a network of his own, people he trusted who could help bring Greg down. But Greg had struck before those plans could come to fruition. When police confronted Greg in prison with the ledger, his composure finally cracked completely. "That interfering old bastard," he raged, sitting there in his little house spying on everyone, acting so innocent with his gardening and his friendly waves. He deserved what he got. Greg's outburst was recorded and added to the mounting evidence against him. But more importantly, it spurred several of his former associates to make full confessions, hoping to earn leniency before the entire operation crumbled. One of these confessions came from Thomas Reed, a former employee who had helped Greg dispose of evidence the night Willis died. His statement provided the final pieces of the puzzle, revealing exactly how events had unfolded. "Marshall called me that night, said he had a problem that needed handling," Reed testified. "When I got there, Willis was already..." Marshall said he'd confronted him about the evidence, tried to buy his silence, but Willis refused to back down, said he was going to expose everything. Marshall lost it, grabbed a heavy bookend from Willis's desk. The detailed confession matched the forensic evidence perfectly, explaining every detail that had puzzled investigators. Reed even led police to where he had helped Greg hide various pieces of evidence, including the murder weapon. As the full scope of the conspiracy emerged, federal authorities became involved. The investigation expanded beyond the state lines, following the trail of money and corruption that Willis had first uncovered. "We've linked Greg's operation to similar schemes in 5 other states," Reynolds updated Lisa and Ethan. His network was helping launder money for drug cartels, human traffickers, even terrorist organizations. The feds estimate the total amount at over $50 million. The implications were staggering. Greg's local business empire had been just one node in a vast criminal network. His contacts, carefully cultivated over years, had facilitated crimes that affected thousands of lives. In prison, stripped of his power, and watching his empire crumble, Greg made one last desperate attempt to regain control. He tried to have Lisa and Ethan killed, offering a fellow inmate payment to arrange their murders, but even this final scheme backfired. The inmate immediately reported the attempt to authorities, wearing a wire to gather additional evidence of Greg's continuing crimes. The recording captured Greg's cold-blooded planning of what he intended to be a fatal accident for his wife and stepson. When Reynolds played the recording for Lisa and Ethan, they sat in stunned silence. Greg's voice, so casual as he discussed ending their lives, drove home just how close they had come to sharing Willis's fate. "He'll never stop," Lisa whispered. "As long as he's alive, he'll keep trying to hurt us." But Greg had finally overplayed his hand. The murder-for-hire attempt added new charges to his already considerable sentence, ensuring he would spend the rest of his life in maximum security, with no possibility of further contact with the outside. The investigation continued to expand, each new revelation adding to the portrait of corruption and violence that Willis had died trying to expose. His meticulous records proved invaluable, leading to arrests and convictions that dismantled not just Greg's operation, but several connected criminal enterprises. In their safe house, Lisa and Ethan began to plan for a future free from Greg's influence. The walls that had initially felt confining now offered security as they processed everything they were learning about the man who had terrorized them for so long. "Mr. Willis knew," Ethan said one evening, looking through some of the documents Reynolds had shared with them. "He knew how dangerous Greg was, but he still tried to help us." Lisa pulled her son close. "He was braver than anyone realized. And so are you, sweetheart. You never stopped fighting for the truth, just like him." As federal agents continued to unravel the complex web of crimes Greg had orchestrated, Lisa and Ethan found comfort in knowing that Jack Willis's sacrifice had not been in vain. His careful documentation, his quiet resistance, and his ultimate sacrifice had set in motion the events that would bring down not just one abuser, but an entire network of corruption. The truth that had cost Willis his life was finally emerging, one damning piece of evidence at a time. And somewhere, they hoped, he knew that his faith in justice had been vindicated at last. Spring sunlight streamed through the newly installed windows of the Parker home, casting warm patterns across freshly painted walls. 3 months had passed since the federal investigation had exposed the full scope of Greg's crimes, and Lisa and Ethan were slowly reclaiming their space, erasing the shadows of their past one small change at a time. The shed where Greg had hidden evidence of his crimes was gone now, demolished and cleared away. In its place, Lisa and Ethan had started a garden, the newly turned earth promising new growth. They had chosen plants that Mr. Willis had loved, tomatoes, sweet peas, and marigolds, that would bloom bright as sunshine. "Mom," Ethan called from the front yard, where he was helping unload supplies from Lisa's new car, another symbol of their fresh start. "Where do you want these paint cans?" Lisa emerged from the house, looking younger somehow, the constant tension that had marked her features during Greg's reign finally easing. "Put them in the garage. We'll tackle your room this weekend." She smiled at her son, marveling at how tall he seemed lately, standing straighter without fear weighing him down. Their return home had been gradual, carefully planned with help from victim services and their ongoing therapy sessions. The first night back had been the hardest, both of them jumping at every creak and shadow. But each day got easier as they reclaimed their space, replacing Greg's dark memories with new, brighter ones. Detective Reynolds visited regularly, keeping them updated on the continuing investigation. She arrived that afternoon as they were sorting through old boxes, deciding what to keep and what to let go. The federal task force made another dozen arrests yesterday, she reported, accepting a glass of lemonade. Greg's network ran deeper than anyone imagined, but Willis's evidence is helping us clean house completely. Ethan looked up from the box he was sorting. Have they found all the money yet? Reynolds shook her head. Some of it's still hidden in overseas accounts, but they're tracking it down. The good news is, since Greg's assets were seized, the government set up a victim restitution fund. That includes you two. Lisa started to protest, but Reynolds held up a hand. Jack Willis specifically documented how Greg used company funds for personal expenses while denying you basic necessities. The restitution board agreed. You're entitled to compensation. The news was overwhelming. After years of financial control and deprivation under Greg, the idea of having resources of their own felt almost unreal. Lisa sat down heavily, tears welling in her eyes. We can't take his money, she whispered. It was never really his money, Reynolds reminded her gently. It was stolen from other victims, laundered through his businesses. The board feels this is the best way to help everyone he hurt start rebuilding their lives. Later that week, they attended a memorial service for Mr. Willis organized by the neighborhood. The turnout surprised everyone, not just locals, but people from all walks of life who had been touched by Jack Willis's quiet kindness over the years. Ethan had been asked to speak, and he stood at the podium now, his voice clear and strong, despite his nervousness. Mr. Willis saw the truth when everyone else looked away. He could have stayed quiet, could have protected himself, but he chose to fight for what was right. He chose to help others, even knowing the risk. The gathered crowd listened intently as Ethan continued. I used to think heroes were like the ones in movies, loud and flashy, with special powers. But Mr. Willis showed me that real heroes are the ones who do what's right even when it's hard, even when no one is watching. He taught me that standing up to evil takes courage, and that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's just a quiet voice saying, "No, this isn't right." After the service, people shared stories about Willis that painted a picture of a man whose kindness had touched countless lives. A young woman told how he'd helped her family avoid foreclosure by teaching them to manage their finances. An elderly neighbor recalled how he'd spent every Sunday helping her with house repairs after her husband died. Jack never wanted recognition, his sister Margaret told Lisa and Ethan. He just couldn't stand by when he saw people hurting. She handed Lisa an envelope. We found this in his papers. It's addressed to you. Lisa's hands shook as she opened the letter later that night, Ethan sitting close beside her on their new couch. The paper carried Jack's neat, precise handwriting. Dear Lisa and Ethan, if you're reading this, something has probably happened to me. I want you to know that whatever comes next, you have more strength than you realize. Never stop fighting for what's right, even when it seems impossible. The truth has a way of coming out, and love has a way of winning in the end. Take care of each other. Plant something beautiful. Remember that after every winter comes spring. With hope, Jack. The letter brought fresh tears, but healing ones this time. They sat together for a long time, drawing strength from each other and from Jack's final words of encouragement. The next day, Ethan returned to school full-time. The administration had been understanding about his irregular attendance during the trial and aftermath, and his teachers worked with him to catch up. Mrs. Thompson, who had noticed his distress so many months ago, now saw a different boy entirely. One who spoke up in class and helped other students who were struggling. I think you might have a future in peer counseling, she told him after he helped a new student adjust to the school. You have a way of connecting with people who are hurting. The suggestion sparked something in Ethan. That evening, he told his mother about his new dream. I want to help kids like us, Mom. Kids who think they're trapped, who don't know how to ask for help. Lisa hugged him tightly, proud of how her son was transforming his pain into purpose. Mr. Willis would love that idea. She had her own healing to focus on. With support from a domestic violence survivors group, Lisa started rebuilding her career, taking classes in accounting. Understanding numbers was what helped Mr. Willis uncover the truth, she explained to Ethan. Maybe I can help other people that way too. Their home continued to transform. The bars Greg had installed on the windows came down. Dark, heavy curtains were replaced with light, airy ones that let in the sun. Lisa's sister Sarah, who had helped them try to escape years ago, became a frequent visitor, helping them create new family traditions to replace the ones fear had stolen. One Saturday morning, they invited the neighbors over for a garden dedication ceremony. In the center of what had once been Greg's shed stood a young maple tree, its leaves dancing in the spring breeze. Around its base, they had planted Willis's favorite flowers in a riot of colors. Jack loved this neighborhood, Margaret, Willis said, touching the tree's trunk gently. He would be so happy to see this place becoming something beautiful. The garden became a symbol of renewal for the whole community. Neighbors who had looked away during Greg's reign of terror now brought plants and offers of help. Children played freely in yards where they had once walked quietly, avoiding attention. The street felt alive again, healing along with the Parkers. Ethan started a journal, inspired by how Mr. Willis had documented everything he observed. But instead of recording crimes and corruption, Ethan wrote about healing and hope. He documented the small victories. The first night they slept without checking the locks 3 times. The first time his mother laughed without covering her mouth. The first spring flowers pushing through the soil in their new garden. The journal helped him process everything they'd been through, and he found himself sharing parts of it with his therapy group. Other kids who had survived abuse drew strength from his words, from seeing how he and his mother had escaped and rebuilt their lives. Lisa found her own way to give back. She started volunteering at a domestic violence shelter, sharing her story with women who thought they had no way out. I was trapped for years, she would tell them. But look at me now. You can escape too. You can build a new life. Their story spread beyond their community. A local newspaper did a feature on their garden and its meaning, leading to speaking engagements at domestic violence awareness events. Lisa and Ethan shared their experience carefully, always emphasizing the importance of having allies like Jack Willis, who were willing to stand up against abuse. The federal investigation continued to expand, with Greg's criminal network unraveling further each day. He remained in maximum security, his attempts to manipulate and control others from prison thwarted by the evidence Willis had gathered. Other victims of his crimes came forward, each story adding to the picture of how many lives he had damaged. But in the Parker home, Greg's power diminished daily. They donated or destroyed everything connected to him, keeping only the documentation needed for ongoing legal proceedings. His name was no longer spoken in their house. He became the past, or simply him, his identity reduced to that of a shadow they had escaped. 1 year to the day after the trial ended, Lisa and Ethan hosted a different kind of gathering in their garden. The flowers were in full bloom, the maple tree had grown strong, and the vegetable plants were heavy with produce. They called it their Freedom Festival, celebrating not just their own liberation, but the strength of their community. Detective Reynolds attended, now a close friend rather than just an investigator. She brought news that the final appeals in Greg's case had been denied. He's never getting out, she assured them. Jack's evidence made sure of that. As the sun set on their celebration, Ethan stood in the garden, looking at the space where the shed had once stood. The flowers swayed in the evening breeze, and somewhere nearby, a bird sang. It seemed impossible that such beauty could exist where there had once been so much darkness. Lisa joined him, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. At 13 now, he was nearly as tall as she was. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "About how Mr. Willis never gave up hope," Ethan replied. Even when he knew how dangerous Greg was, he kept believing that the truth would win in the end. And it did. Lisa said softly. Because he taught us to believe in it too. They stood together in their garden of healing, surrounded by the legacy of a man who had given his life to protect others. The truth had indeed won out, just as Jack Willis had believed it would. Greg's power was broken, his empire dismantled, his ability to hurt others finally ended. But more than that, hope had won, love had won. The quiet strength that Jack Willis had seen in Lisa and Ethan had blossomed like the flowers in their garden, transforming their pain into purpose, their fear into freedom. As darkness fell, they lit lanterns in the garden, a tradition. They had started to remember not just what they had survived, but what they had become. Each light represented a truth Jack Willis had taught them. That evil thrives in darkness but cannot survive in light. That ordinary people can show extraordinary courage, and that even the deepest wounds can heal with time and love. The garden would continue to grow, each flower and vegetable a testament to life's resilience. The maple tree would stretch higher, its roots growing strong in soil that had been cleansed of its dark history. And in this place of healing, Lisa and Ethan Parker would continue to build their new life, supported by the community that had finally learned to stand together against darkness. They had survived the worst of storms and emerged stronger, their bond unbreakable, their future bright with possibility. Just as Jack Willis had promised in his final letter, spring had indeed come after their long winter, bringing with it the promise of renewal and the certainty that love, in the end, would always find a way to bloom. What would you do if you witnessed injustice? Would you find the courage to speak, even when every instinct tells you to stay silent? If this story moved you, help us share its message of hope and courage. Like, subscribe, and join us for more powerful true stories of ordinary people who chose to do extraordinary things. Because sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest voices. Remember, courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, "Not today."